Imagine waking up tomorrow to breaking news. The skies over the Pacific are no longer safe. Two of the most powerful air forces ever assembled by human civilization are locked in a confrontation that could reshape the entire world order in a matter of hours. Not days, not weeks. Hours. Because in modern aerial warfare, the window between peace and catastrophe is measured in seconds, and the machines doing the deciding fly faster than the speed of sound. This is not science fiction. This is not a movie trailer. This is the reality of 2026, where the United States Air Force and the People's Liberation Army Air Force stand eye to eye across the Pacific, each holding weapons that their grandfathers couldn't have dreamed of, each trained by doctrine built on decades of hard-won lessons, each convinced that if war comes, they will win. But here's the question that keeps Pentagon war planners awake at 3 in the morning: are they right? Can America still dominate the skies the way it has since 1945? Or has China quietly, patiently, and brilliantly closed a gap that once seemed impossible to close? Today we're going to answer that question. And the answer is going to surprise you. Let's travel back in time for just a moment. Because to understand where we are in 2026, you have to understand where we came from. After World War II ended, America emerged as the undisputed master of the air. The B-29 Superfortress had already rewritten the rulebook on strategic bombing. American engineers, fueled by wartime urgency and post-war ambition, were already sketching the blueprints for jet-powered aircraft that would leave propeller-driven planes in the history books. The Korean War became the first proving ground for jet combat, where American F-86 Sabres clashed with Soviet-supplied MiG-15s over a narrow corridor of sky called MiG Alley. Those dogfights produced some of the most intense aerial combat the world had ever seen, and they taught American pilots something crucial: speed, altitude, and technology matter, but so does training, so does coordination, and so does the will to fight. America won that air campaign, not easily, not cleanly, but decisively enough. Then came Vietnam, and Vietnam humbled the United States Air Force in ways nobody had anticipated. Here was the most technologically advanced Air Force on Earth, flying supersonic jets equipped with radar-guided missiles, and it was being challenged, sometimes beaten, by North Vietnamese pilots flying older aircraft, using clever tactics, fighting on home turf, and supported by some of the most sophisticated Soviet air defense systems ever deployed. The lessons of Vietnam triggered a revolution in American military aviation. The Top Gun School was created. Dissimilar air combat training became standard. The F-15 Eagle was born, a machine so good that decades later, it still has a combat record of over 100 kills and 0 losses. The A-10 Warthog was created specifically to kill tanks. The F-16 Fighting Falcon gave the Air Force an affordable, agile, deadly multi-role fighter that could be produced in huge numbers. And all of this was before stealth. Stealth changed everything. When the F-117 Nighthawk flew its first combat missions during Operation Desert Storm in 1991, the world got its first glimpse of a new era in warfare. Aircraft that could approach heavily defended targets without being detected. Aircraft that could strike with precision measured in feet rather than hundreds of yards. The combination of stealth, precision-guided munitions, and networked warfare made Desert Storm look like a lopsided sporting event rather than a battle between organized military forces. Iraq's Air Force was largely destroyed on the ground or driven into hiding within the first 72 hours. American losses were remarkably low. The world watched and learned. And no nation learned more carefully than China. In 1991, China's military was in a deeply uncomfortable position. They watched American forces dismantle the fourth-largest army in the world in a matter of weeks, using technologies that China simply didn't possess. The People's Liberation Army, the PLA, had spent the Cold War era building a massive force based on Soviet doctrine and Soviet equipment, and overnight that entire model looked obsolete. Chinese military leaders and political strategists sat down and asked themselves a hard question. If America can do this to Iraq, what would it do to us? The answer was sobering. And it set China on a course of military modernization that has continued, accelerated, and achieved results that have genuinely startled Western intelligence analysts. China's approach to catching up was methodical and multi-layered. They invested in espionage. Multiple incidents of Chinese intelligence operations targeting American defense contractors resulted in the theft of technical data on some of the most advanced aircraft systems in the world, including reportedly the F-35. They invested in domestic aerospace engineering, building up universities, research programs, and a defense industrial base capable of designing and manufacturing world-class combat aircraft. They studied American doctrine obsessively, publishing military journals that analyzed Desert Storm, Kosovo, Afghanistan, and Iraq in exhausting detail. And they identified what they believed was America's greatest vulnerability. The United States cannot fight a war in the Pacific without its network of air bases, carrier battle groups, and logistical supply chains stretching across thousands of miles of ocean. Attack that network, they reasoned, and the American air power advantage collapses. This strategic logic gave birth to what Western analysts call anti-access, area denial, or ATOAD. The idea is brutally elegant. You don't have to outfight the American Air Force plane for plane if you can make it impossible for those planes to operate from bases close enough to matter. China built the Dongfeng ballistic missile family, long-range precision weapons capable of striking American air bases in Japan, South Korea, Guam, and even potentially further. They built anti-ship ballistic missiles, designed specifically to hit aircraft carriers at ranges that would keep American carrier strike groups at arm's distance from the Chinese mainland. They built sophisticated integrated air defense systems layered so deep and so wide that penetrating them requires the very best stealth technology in the American arsenal. And simultaneously, they built aircraft capable of challenging American fighters on something closer to equal terms. The Chengdu J-20 Mighty Dragon is the centerpiece of China's aerial challenge to American dominance. When it made its first public flight in 2011, many Western analysts initially dismissed it. Some suggested it was more of a political statement than a genuine combat aircraft. They were wrong. The J-20 is a genuine fifth-generation stealth fighter, broadly comparable in concept to the American F-22 Raptor. It features a stealthy airframe design, advanced avionics internal weapons bays that preserve its radar cross-section, and an impressive range that allows it to operate across wide swaths of the Pacific. As of 2026, China has deployed hundreds of J-20s, making it the second largest operational fleet of fifth-generation fighters on Earth. The F-35 fleet remains larger, but the gap has narrowed in ways that would have seemed impossible just 15 years ago. And the J-20 is not alone. China also fields the Shenyang FC-31, a smaller twin-engine stealth fighter that appears to be intended for carrier operations as well as land-based roles. The FC-31 is China's answer to the F-35, a multi-role stealth aircraft that provides operational flexibility. Then there are the so-called fourth-generation plus aircraft, the J-16, a sophisticated twin-engine multi-role fighter comparable to the American F-15E Strike Eagle, and the J-10C, a capable single-engine fighter that represents the backbone of many PLAAF units. China's fighter fleet in 2026 is not just large, it is modern, increasingly sophisticated, and backed by a domestic defense industry capable of producing aircraft at scale. Now let's talk about America's side of the equation, because the United States Air Force in 2026 is not standing still either. The F-22 Raptor remains, by most assessments, the finest pure air superiority fighter ever built. Its combination of supercruise, the ability to fly at supersonic speeds without using afterburner extreme stealth, advanced sensors, and sophisticated avionics, gives it capabilities that no other aircraft currently matches in that specific mission. The problem is numbers. The F-22 program was capped at just 186 aircraft due to budget decisions made in the early 2000s, when strategic thinkers couldn't imagine China building anything like it. That decision looks increasingly unfortunate in retrospect. The F-35 Lightning II is where American air power lives and breathes in 2026. Over 3,000 F-35s have been ordered across the three American service variants and allied nations combined, making it the most widely produced fifth-generation fighter in history. The F-35A is the conventional takeoff Air Force variant. The F-35B provides short takeoff and vertical landing capability for the Marine Corps and allied nations, and the F-35C is the carrier-based Navy variant. What makes the F-35 genuinely revolutionary is not primarily its stealth, though that is world-class, but its sensor fusion. The F-35's computers take data from radar, infrared sensors, electronic warfare systems, and data links from other aircraft and satellites, and present it to the pilot as a single coherent picture of the battlespace. An F-35 pilot doesn't just see more, they understand more faster with less cognitive load. In a modern air battle where decisions must be made in fractions of a second, that advantage is profound. Beyond the F-35, America has the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, 20 aircraft capable of delivering conventional or nuclear weapons with near invisibility against radar-guided defenses. The B-21 Raider, the B-2's successor, began operational service recently and extends this capability with a more modern stealth design and advanced systems. The Boeing B-52 Stratofortress, a design that first flew in 1952, remains in service as a standoff weapons platform, launching cruise missiles from ranges that keep it far outside enemy air defense envelopes. The B-52 has been so thoroughly upgraded with modern avionics and weapon systems that its ancient airframe carries genuinely modern combat capability. When people joke that the B-52 will be flown by the grandchildren of its original pilots, they're not entirely wrong, and that's a tribute to how good the design is. The American aerial weapons inventory in 2026 extends far beyond piloted aircraft. The AGM-158 JASSM and its extended-range variant JASSMER are low observable cruise missiles with ranges exceeding 1,000 kilometers, allowing aircraft to strike deeply defended targets without entering the threat envelope. The AIM-120 AMRAAM air-to-air missile, now in its most advanced D variant, provides American fighters with a beyond visual range engagement capability that remains among the best in the world. And the classified programs, the things that aren't in any open-source document, represent a category of American military power that analysts can only guess at. The United States has a long history of operational secret aircraft programs. The U-2, the SR-71, the F-117 all flew operationally before the public knew they existed. What is being developed right now, in the black programs funded by billions of dollars that never appear in public budget lines, is anyone's guess, and that uncertainty is itself a strategic asset. But here's where the conversation gets genuinely complicated, and where simple answers start to break down. The question of who wins an air war between the United States and China in 2026 is not simply a question of which side has better aircraft. Modern warfare is a systems competition. It's about networks, it's about logistics, it's about geography, it's about doctrine and training and will. And on several of these dimensions, the picture is considerably more nuanced than simple aircraft comparisons suggest. Let's talk about geography first, because geography is destiny in the Pacific. The United States Pacific Air Forces are structured around a network of bases spread across enormous distances. Andersen Air Force Base in Guam sits roughly 3,000 kilometers from the Chinese coast. Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, Japan, is much closer, but it is also within range of Chinese ballistic missiles. America's Pacific air power depends on the ability to operate from these bases, and China has invested enormously in weapons specifically designed to threaten them. The DF-26 ballistic missile, sometimes called the Guam Killer, can reach Andersen with sufficient accuracy to threaten aircraft parked on the flight line, fuel storage, and runway surfaces. If China could degrade or destroy American air bases in the opening hours of a conflict, the equation shifts dramatically. The United States has not been ignoring this problem. There is active investment in hardening air bases, distributing aircraft across a wider network of smaller fields, developing agile combat employment concepts that allow American air power to operate from dispersed locations rather than concentrated bases. The idea is to deny China the ability to neutralize American air power with a handful of precise missile strikes by making it impossible to predict where the aircraft will be. Logistics convoys, mobile maintenance teams, and prepositioning of fuel and munitions at austere airfields. These are the unglamorous realities of 21st century Pacific air power planning. The Air Force has been exercising agile combat employment extensively across the Pacific, rotating through bases in the Philippines, Australia, Palau, and other locations in an effort to build the muscle memory and logistical infrastructure for distributed operations. But here's the problem: dispersed operations are harder operations. Aircraft that are operating from small, austere airfields with minimal maintenance infrastructure and limited spare parts availability degrade faster. Sorties are harder to sustain. Coordination becomes more complex. The sheer tyranny of distance in the Pacific creates a logistics burden that has no parallel in any other theater where American forces might fight. Fuel alone is a staggering challenge. Jet fuel for fighter operations is heavy, bulky, difficult to store safely, and requires large numbers of tanker aircraft to move it from secure locations to forward bases. The KC-135 and KC-46 tanker fleets are essential to American Pacific air power, and they are themselves vulnerable to Chinese attack if they operate within range. China's geography is both an advantage and a constraint. Operating on interior lines, the military term for being closer to the center of the action, China can surge aircraft from bases across its vast eastern coastline without the fuel and logistics challenges that burden American operations. Chinese fighters attacking targets in the South China Sea or around Taiwan don't need aerial refueling to reach their operating areas. Chinese air defense systems protect aircraft as they return to base. Maintenance and resupply are straightforward compared to the American challenge of operating thousands of miles from home. On the other hand, China's geographic concentration also means that American strikes on Chinese air bases, delivered by stealth bombers and long-range cruise missiles, could potentially neutralize large portions of Chinese air power in a single concentrated effort. The same geographic concentration that makes China's Air Force operationally efficient also makes it, in principle, targetable. Now let's address the most technically fascinating and most genuinely uncertain aspect of this entire competition: stealth versus counter-stealth. The premise of American air power strategy since the late 1980s has been that stealth aircraft can penetrate defended airspace without being detected by radar. This premise has held up reasonably well in combat. The F-117 operated over Baghdad for weeks before the Iraqis managed to shoot one down, and that shoot-down required very specific tactics and a degree of luck that American planners worked hard to eliminate. But in 2026, the stealth versus radar competition has reached a new level of sophistication. China has invested heavily in what are called low-frequency radars, systems operating at wavelengths much longer than the X-band frequencies that stealth aircraft are primarily optimized to defeat. Long-wave radars, including VHF and UHF band systems, can detect stealth aircraft at some range, though not with the precision targeting accuracy needed to actually guide a missile to a kill. China has also invested in passive detection systems, sensors that don't emit radar signals but instead detect the heat signature, acoustic signature, or electromagnetic emissions of aircraft. A passive system can't be jammed with electronic warfare the way an active radar can. And China has been developing bistatic and multistatic radar networks, systems where the transmitter and receiver are in different locations, that are considerably harder to defeat with traditional stealth shaping and coatings. Does this mean stealth is dead? Emphatically no, but it means stealth is contested in ways it wasn't 20 years ago. The honest assessment from Western air power analysts in 2026 is that a B-21 Raider or an F-22 operating against Chinese air defenses would face a more capable environment than F-117s faced over Baghdad in 1991. The aircraft would still have significant advantages, but those advantages are narrower than they once were, and the cost of being detected, flying into a network of S-400 derivatives and Chinese-designed long-range surface-to-air missiles, is catastrophically high. This brings us to the electronic warfare dimension, which may ultimately be as important as anything else in a US-China air battle. Electronic warfare is the art of interfering with an enemy's radar, communications, and sensor systems while protecting your own. The EA-18G Growler is the American Navy's dedicated electronic attack aircraft, a platform that has been continuously upgraded, and that provides a capability to suppress enemy air defenses that no other nation currently matches. American F-35s also carry sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities integrated into their overall sensor suite. But China has been developing its own electronic warfare systems at a rapid pace, and the concern among American analysts is that a full-scale conflict would involve an electromagnetic environment so complex and contested that both sides' ability to command and control their forces effectively would be severely degraded. In that environment, the side with better trained pilots who can operate more autonomously, who can fight effectively when the data links go down and the GPS signals are jammed, might have a decisive advantage. Training is something that Americans have traditionally done better than almost anyone else, and it remains a genuine American advantage in 2026. American fighter pilots fly more hours per year than their Chinese counterparts on average. American exercises are designed to be as realistic and stressful as possible. Exercises like Red Flag at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada put pilots against sophisticated simulated threats and highly capable aggressor squadrons that replicate enemy tactics. The culture of American military aviation prizes initiative, independent judgment, and the willingness to make rapid decisions without waiting for orders from above. This decentralized approach to decision-making is deeply embedded in American military doctrine, and it produces pilots who are comfortable acting independently when communications are disrupted or the situation changes unexpectedly. China's approach has historically been more centralized, pilots operating within a rigid control structure, following orders from ground-based controllers rather than exercising individual initiative. This is consistent with the broader organizational culture of the PLA, which prizes discipline and hierarchy over individual entrepreneurship. However, it would be a serious mistake to assume this remains the case without question. The PLA has been actively working to change its training culture, running more complex exercises, giving pilots more latitude to make decisions, and studying American doctrinal publications in detail. Chinese pilots are also accumulating real operational experience through patrols and intercepts near Taiwan, Japan, and in the South China Sea. The gap in training quality that American analysts once confidently cited has almost certainly narrowed, though by how much is genuinely difficult to assess from open sources. Let's talk about artificial intelligence and autonomous systems, because this may be the dimension of the air war that matters most in the future, and in 2026, the future has already arrived to a greater degree than most people realize. Both the United States and China have invested enormous resources in applying artificial intelligence to military aviation. The vision is not necessarily fully autonomous aircraft that fight wars without human control, though that research exists on both sides, but rather AI-assisted decision-making that allows pilots and commanders to process information faster and make better decisions under the crushing cognitive load of modern aerial combat. An AI system that can analyze radar tracks, identify threats, suggest weapon employment solutions, and manage electronic warfare responses faster than any human being. That is a force multiplier that doesn't show up in an aircraft count comparison. The Collaborative Combat Aircraft Program in the United States, sometimes called the Loyal Wingman concept, aims to pair manned fighters with groups of unmanned combat aircraft that can carry weapons, sensors, and electronic warfare systems in coordination with their human-flown leaders. The idea is compelling. Instead of a single F-35 carrying 8 weapons into a fight, you have an F-35 directing a formation of 5 or 6 unmanned wingmen, each carrying additional missiles, effectively multiplying the firepower of each manned aircraft several times over. The unmanned aircraft take risks that you wouldn't accept for a piloted plane. They fly into the engagement zone first, drawing out enemy missile shots, forcing the adversary to reveal their radar signatures, and potentially absorbing hits so that the manned aircraft survive. China is pursuing the same concept with equal urgency, and the race to deploy effective loyal wingman systems at scale is one of the defining military technology competitions of this decade. Space is the invisible dimension of the air war that rarely gets discussed in public, but that both sides understand is absolutely critical. Modern air power depends on GPS navigation for weapons guidance, satellite communications for command and control, and space-based intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets that provide targeting data and battle damage assessment. China has developed sophisticated anti-satellite capabilities, both kinetic kill vehicles that can physically destroy satellites in orbit and directed energy weapons that can blind or degrade satellite sensors. America has responded by developing more resilient satellite architectures, distributing capabilities across larger numbers of smaller satellites rather than concentrating them in fewer large ones, and by investing in backup navigation systems that don't rely solely on GPS. But the space dimension adds profound uncertainty to any assessment of how an air war would actually unfold. If China successfully degraded American space-based assets in the opening phase of a conflict, the ability of American forces to coordinate, navigate, and target would be significantly impaired. Undersea warfare connects to air power in ways that are not immediately obvious. American nuclear submarines carry the Tomahawk cruise missile, which can strike targets hundreds of miles inland, and which would be among the first weapons employed against Chinese air defenses in any conflict. Virginia-class submarines operating in the Western Pacific would be tasked with striking Chinese radar systems, command and control nodes, and air defense batteries, creating corridors of reduced threat through which American aircraft could operate. But Chinese anti-submarine warfare capabilities have improved dramatically in recent years, and the ability of American submarines to operate freely in Chinese-dominated coastal waters is considerably more constrained than it was a decade ago. This creates a complex strategic interaction between the undersea and aerial domains that adds yet another layer of uncertainty to the overall picture. Now let's have an honest conversation about Taiwan, because Taiwan is the scenario that war planners on both sides spend the most time gaming. An amphibious invasion of Taiwan by Chinese forces would require absolute air superiority over the Taiwan Strait and the island itself. China simply cannot move the number of ships and troops required for a successful invasion if American and Taiwanese aircraft can operate freely and attack the invasion fleet. So the air war over Taiwan would not be a peripheral engagement. It would be the central battle on which everything else depended. And the geography of Taiwan creates some fascinating tactical dynamics. The island sits just 180 kilometers off the Chinese coast, a distance that even short-legged fighters can cover quickly. Chinese air power could sortie multiple times per day against targets on Taiwan. American forces operating from Kadena in Okinawa are several hundred kilometers further away, and forces from Guam are 3,000 kilometers distant and would require aerial refueling. Taiwan's own Air Force is a factor that is sometimes overlooked in these assessments. The Republic of China Air Force operates F-16V fighters, the most advanced variant of the F-16, with active electronically scanned array radar and modern weapons, along with indigenous Chingqiu fighters and aging Mirage 2000s. Taiwan has invested in surface-to-air missile systems, including PAC-3 Patriot batteries and indigenous systems that would make an air campaign over Taiwan costly for any attacker. And Taiwan has been building underground facilities, hardened shelters, dispersed fuel storage, underground command posts that are designed to survive a Chinese missile opening strike and allow continued operations. The question is whether those preparations are sufficient to survive the weight of a Chinese first strike that could involve hundreds of ballistic and cruise missiles launched simultaneously. One of the most significant developments in the China versus America air power competition in 2026 is the expansion of China's aircraft carrier fleet. China now operates multiple aircraft carriers, including the domestically designed Type 3 Fujian, a conventional takeoff and landing carrier equipped with electromagnetic catapults similar in concept to those on American Ford-class carriers. Chinese carrier aviation is still developing operational experience, but the trajectory is unmistakably upward. Carrier-based aircraft extend Chinese air power away from land bases and into the open Pacific, complicating American planning and potentially providing China with a strike capability that can threaten American bases in Guam and even Hawaii at longer range than land-based systems. This is not a capability China possesses today in mature form, but it is one that is developing with impressive speed. American carrier aviation remains the gold standard of the world's naval air power. The combination of nuclear-powered Nimitz and Gerald Ford-class supercarriers with air wings built around F-35CS and EA-18G Growlers represents a strike capability that no other nation on Earth comes close to matching. American carrier battle groups are defended by Aegis cruisers and destroyers with hundreds of surface-to-air missiles, nuclear-powered attack submarines operating in company, and E-2D Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft that extend the battle group's radar horizon hundreds of miles. But Chinese anti-ship ballistic missiles, particularly the DF-21D and DF-26, cast a long shadow over carrier operations in the Western Pacific. American carriers would likely be held back from the China coast, operating from ranges of perhaps 1,000 to 1,500 kilometers, which pushes them beyond the unrefueled range of carrier-based fighters. The carrier air wing becomes a standoff strike force rather than a close support weapon, a role for which the F-35C is well suited, but which fundamentally changes how the carrier is employed. The pilot-human factor deserves additional attention, because it is often the variable that determines the outcome of aerial combat more than any technical specification. History repeatedly shows that the side with better trained, better led, more experienced pilots prevails even when outgunned technically. In the Korean War, American pilots with World War II experience consistently outperformed their opponents despite flying comparable aircraft. In the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Israeli pilots with superior training and tactical flexibility defeated larger Arab air forces flying similar Soviet equipment. In the 1982 Bekaa Valley Air Campaign, Israeli Air Force fighters destroyed dozens of Syrian aircraft without losing a single plane, a result that stunned the world, and that was driven almost entirely by superior training and tactics rather than technology. American military aviation culture produces pilots who are genuinely exceptional. The selection process is demanding, the training pipeline is thorough, and the culture of continuous improvement, the debrief culture where every mission is analyzed in detail for lessons learned, creates pilots who improve rapidly with experience. Top Gun, the Navy's fighter weapons school, and the Air Force's equivalent programs at Nellis produce instructors who spread best practices across the entire force. And America's Alliance Network provides an additional training benefit that is often underestimated. American pilots regularly exercise with British Typhoon pilots, Japanese F-35 pilots, Australian FA-18 pilots, and dozens of other partners, gaining exposure to different tactics and building the interoperability that makes coalition operations effective. China's pilot training quality, as mentioned earlier, has improved dramatically and continues to improve. But the PLA has not fought a major air war since the Korean conflict 70 years ago, and there is simply no substitute for the kind of institutional knowledge and operational experience that comes from sustained combat operations. American pilots have been flying in combat operations for decades, from Desert Storm through Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and a constant tempo of operations that means even young pilots benefit from the experience of instructors who have seen real combat. The American military has what organizational theorists call institutional memory of combat, built into its culture and doctrine in ways that are difficult to quantify but genuinely important. The logistics comparison, which may seem less exciting than aircraft specifications but is ultimately more determinative of who wins a long war, strongly favors the United States when global context is considered. America has the largest, most experienced military logistics network in the history of human civilization. The ability to move enormous quantities of fuel, munitions, spare parts, and replacement aircraft across the Pacific is something the American military has been developing and practicing since World War II. The Air Force's Air Mobility Command operates hundreds of strategic transport aircraft and aerial tankers that give American forces a global reach that no other nation possesses. American defense industry, while it has faced capacity challenges in recent years, retains the ability to surge production of critical munitions and replacement systems in ways that could sustain a prolonged conflict. China's logistics, while enormously improved over the past 2 decades, faces a fundamental challenge in any Pacific air war. Most of its operations would be conducted from secure bases within its own territory, which is a massive advantage in terms of fuel and maintenance. But the ability to sustain operations over extended time periods against a sophisticated adversary that is actively targeting logistics infrastructure is less tested. Chinese defense industry is large and increasingly capable, but the emphasis on peacetime production efficiency rather than wartime surge capacity means that sustaining high-tempo combat operations against serious resistance, the kind of resistance that consumes enormous quantities of missiles, is a question that has not been definitively answered. Cybersecurity and electronic warfare add yet another dimension to this already complex picture. The United States Air Force depends on network systems, computer networks that link sensors, decision makers, and weapons in ways that dramatically multiply combat effectiveness. Those networks are also potential vulnerabilities. China has developed sophisticated cyber capabilities, and in a conflict scenario, Chinese cyber operations against American military networks would be among the first actions taken. The ability to degrade American command and control, to insert false information into targeting systems, to slow the flow of intelligence data, these are potential force multipliers for China that don't show up in any aircraft comparison. America has its own offensive cyber capabilities, and American cyber forces would be simultaneously targeting Chinese military networks, creating a bilateral electromagnetic and cyber battle that runs parallel to the physical air war. The nuclear dimension, which nobody wants to talk about but nobody can responsibly ignore, sits over this entire conversation like a dark cloud. Both the United States and China are nuclear-armed states. Both possess the ability to destroy major population centers with nuclear weapons delivered by ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and aircraft. Both maintain second strike capabilities that make a successful nuclear disarming first strike effectively impossible. This mutual vulnerability creates a powerful deterrent effect that constrains how both sides would fight a conventional conflict. Neither side wants to push the other to the point where nuclear weapons start to look attractive. American war planners are acutely aware that strikes on certain Chinese targets, major political leadership nodes, certain military command facilities, might be interpreted as part of a nuclear attack and could trigger nuclear retaliation. This escalation management challenge fundamentally shapes how an air campaign against China would be designed and executed. So where does all of this leave us? After examining aircraft, missiles, radar, stealth, electronic warfare, logistics, training, geography, space, cyber, and the nuclear backdrop, who actually wins an air war between the United States and China in 2026? The honest answer, and it's an answer that the most serious defense analysts on both sides have arrived at, is that the outcome is genuinely uncertain in ways it was not a decade ago. The comfortable American confidence in air power dominance that existed in 2001 or even 2010 is no longer justified. China has closed gaps, developed asymmetric capabilities, and built a force that can credibly contest American air power in its own backyard. American technology retains important advantages in stealth, sensor fusion, electronic warfare, pilot training, and alliance integration, but those advantages are narrower and more contested than at any time since the Cold War. The scenario matters enormously. A Chinese attempt to take Taiwan by force in the near-term timeframe would likely result in enormous casualties and losses on both sides, with the outcome depending heavily on factors that are impossible to predict with precision: the effectiveness of China's opening missile salvos, the survivability of American forward air bases, the ability of American submarines to attract Chinese naval forces, and the decisions made by political leaders on both sides about escalation. Simulations run by American think tanks and war gaming centers have produced results that are frankly disturbing: multiple scenarios in which China successfully establishes air superiority over Taiwan for a period sufficient to begin amphibious operations, and other scenarios in which American and allied forces inflict sufficient losses on Chinese air power to make an invasion unsustainable. The range of outcomes is genuinely wide. The United States retains structural advantages that should not be minimized. The network of alliances that American air power operates within, Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines, and other partners, provides basing options, intelligence sharing, and operational integration that China cannot replicate. America spends more on defense in absolute terms and retains a technological innovation culture, driven by the combination of defense industry investment and commercial sector technological development, that continues to produce advances in AI, sensors, materials, and weapon systems. The F-35 program, for all the criticism it has received, is producing a genuinely world-class aircraft in large numbers and continues to improve through software updates that regularly add new capabilities. In classified programs, those black-budget aircraft and weapons systems that the public knows nothing about represent a category of potential American surprise that any adversary must factor into their planning. China's trajectory, however, is the story of this generation. The pace of Chinese military modernization since 1991 has been extraordinary by any historical standard. The quality gap between American and Chinese military aircraft has gone from enormous to contested in 30 years. If that trajectory continues, if China sustains its defense investment, continues to develop its aerospace engineering capability, and continues to close the training and doctrine gaps, the window of American advantage in the Pacific air domain may be measured in years rather than decades. This is the central strategic reality that drives American defense planning and investment decisions in 2026, and it is a reality that demands serious engagement rather than comfortable assumptions. The men and women who fly these aircraft on both sides are extraordinary human beings. They train for years to master machines that operate at the edge of physics, to make life and death decisions in fractions of a second, to operate in environments of extraordinary danger and complexity. The air crews of the United States Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps are among the finest military professionals in the history of aviation. And yes, the pilots of the People's Liberation Army Air Force, trained with increasing sophistication, flying increasingly capable aircraft, are also skilled, committed, and willing to fight for what they believe in. If these two forces ever meet in actual combat, and let us be absolutely clear that neither side wants that outcome, because both sides understand exactly how catastrophic it would be, the battle would be fought by humans of extraordinary ability on both sides. Technology matters enormously. Strategy matters enormously. Geography matters enormously. But the human beings inside those cockpits, the decisions they make under pressure, the training that built their instincts, and the courage with which they execute their missions, that will matter most of all. We began this story with a question: who wins the air war if the United States and China go head-to-head in 2026? The real answer is that the most important victory is the one that never has to be fought. The elaborate dance of military capability, strategic deterrence, diplomatic engagement, and mutual understanding of catastrophic risk is designed to make actual combat between these two nuclear-armed superpowers unthinkable. American air power is maintained not to fight China, but to convince China that fighting America is an option no rational Chinese leader should choose. Chinese air power is maintained not simply to fight America, but to convince American planners that the cost of intervening in Chinese interests would be catastrophically high. This mutual deterrence, ugly, expensive, and imperfect as it is, has kept these two nations from direct conflict for decades and may continue to do so. The best air war is the one where the aircraft take off, fly their patrols, and come home without a single shot fired in anger. But if that deterrence ever fails, if miscalculation, crisis, or political pressure drives these two nations into actual combat in the skis over the Pacific, the world will discover that air power in 2026 is faster, more lethal, more technically complex, and more consequential than at any previous point in the history of flight. The aircraft are extraordinary, the weapons are devastating, the stakes are civilization level, and the outcome is genuinely, deeply uncertain. That uncertainty, the fact that neither side can be confident of winning quickly and cleanly, may be the most important stabilizing factor we have. Because uncertain wars are wars that rational actors try hard to avoid. And in a world where two superpowers armed with nuclear weapons are contesting dominance of the sky over the world's most consequential ocean, the cultivation of rational actors on both sides is the most important defense project of all. Now I want to hear from you, because this conversation doesn't end here, it starts here. After everything you've just heard, after weighing the aircraft, the missiles, the geography, the training, and the strategy, what do you believe? Do you think American air power retains a decisive edge that would deter China from ever testing it? Or has China's rapid modernization already created a situation where American dominance can no longer be assumed? Drop your answer in the comments right now. The debate in that comment section is going to be fascinating, and I read every single one. If this video made you think differently about air power, about China, about America, or about the future of the Pacific, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this with someone who needs to understand what's really happening in the skis over the Pacific in 2026. Because this story is not over. This story is just beginning.